Next, we have one of the world's biggest creators of interactive content, and he's responsible for making experiences on every possible digital platform. His leadership roles include several media companies, including the Oprah Winfrey Network, Sony Pictures Entertainment, and of course, MTV. And to top it off, he was even named a Fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts for his efforts to help social progress through media. In short, he's done a lot through different mediums. So without further ado, we're pleased to present this year's inaugural keynote speaker, Robert Tercek, the founder of General Creativity.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be back in Asia. I want to thank Jasper, Diane, for bringing me here. Thank you to the MDA of Singapore and all the other sponsors for making this event possible. And I want to give a shout out to my former colleagues, the original launch team of Star TV and MTV Asia. I see many of you here today. I'm thrilled to be back in Asia. In the media industry, we're going through a time of tremendous change. At the moment, you're seeing television being unbundled. Online video is surging. The music industry continues to try to redefine itself. The movie business is about to go through a transformation akin to what the music industry went through 10 years ago. Online gaming is changing with the advent of social games. And just last week, Amazon announced that the sales of digital books are now outpacing the combined sales of hardcover books and paperbacks. And so every media industry is going through this tremendous period of change. But what I want to tell you about today is something that's so much larger, something that's so much bigger, that I believe it's going to transform human civilization. I know that's a crazy, bold claim, but the point I'm trying to make today is that the changes you're experiencing in the media industry are really at the forefront, maybe the cutting edge, of changes that are going to affect just about every industry on Earth. We all know that today we have access to more media technology than ever before in history. If you look back 15 years ago, the typical household had the following things: a television set, perhaps a computer, but it was Dad's old computer from the office, a desktop machine, landline telephone. Some people were starting to connect to the internet, but it was fairly early, using dial-up connections. We had television set-top boxes, but they were there just to decode satellite or cable TV signals, so they were very simple devices. Of course, we had our early game consoles, the 24-bit game consoles like the first-generation PlayStation, and other things, stereos, film cameras, and so on. But these devices were all analog. In just 15 years, the number of devices in our household has increased tremendously. It's at least doubled. This is typical of a household, of a fairly typical household, at least in North America and Europe, increasingly in other parts of the world. What's important to note is that not only have the number of devices increased, every one of these devices has microprocessors and some form of network access. And so each device is able to communicate with each other using these open standard protocols. Now that's very important because those protocols, those communication protocols that make those devices talk to each other, that's what's made it possible for this tremendous amount of social innovation, social software to occur. And these social services, these new social networking and social media applications, there are thousands of them. Every single day, new companies are launched, new applications are launched on just about every device. And so we have all these devices in our homes, and they're all talking to each other. I'm sure you've experienced this yourself because we've had this incredible increase in the number of emails, instant messages, social networking mails, and so forth. Most people argue or say that they've experienced an increase. Recent surveys said that 90% of the respondents have experienced an increase in the number of messages that they're getting every single day. Only 10% felt that they're getting fewer. 48% of the respondents in that survey also said that they are online all day long, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. How many people in the audience experience that? I do every single day. I turn on my phone the minute I get up and I check it right before I go to bed. So we're living online. We're communicating all the time using these digital devices. 10 years ago, there were about 250 million internet users, and that seemed like a staggeringly large number at the time. And there were about 500 million mobile phones in use. In just a 10-year span, those numbers have increased by tenfold. 5 billion mobile phones in use. There are only 7 billion humans on the planet. What's probably more important, though, is the number of devices that have a broadband connection, of 555 million landline connections, and 1 billion mobile phones have a broadband connection. So together with the dial-up connections that are still there, the 1.5 dial-up connections, that gives us a total internet user base of about 3 billion. Now, that's far short from half of the Earth's population, but it's increasing and it's growing rapidly. As you can see from this diagram, the areas of the world of most intense usage are still primarily in the north and primarily in the western parts of the world and coastal regions. And so there's vast stretches of the planet that have yet to be wired. But what's important about this figure, 3 billion, is to put it in contrast. There have never been more than 2 billion television sets in use on the planet. Never more than 2 billion in use at any given time. And last year, for the first time, the number of televisions purchased went down by 1 million. So it appears that television, the dominant medium of the previous century, has reached its zenith. And increasingly, we're going to be migrating en masse to a new type of communication, not one that's defined by vertical broadcast industries that are centrally controlled, but one that is more like telephony, horizontal communication technologies that allow people to communicate with each other through media experiences. And so what we're all experiencing in our own industry is this transformation where broadcast media or print media turn into two-way media. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. By sheer virtue of the number of users, the amount of time we spend, and the number of devices we have, our production of information is increasing faster than anything in history, faster than our consumption of anything, energy, fuel, of any sort, any kind of resource. And so this is actually an important historical moment. We're generating information so fast that Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, said that we doubled the amount of information that we create every 2 days. Now, he said this recently, just a few months before he resigned from his position at the TechCrunch conference. Every 2 days, we create as much information as all of humanity did up to the year 2003. Now, Google, who indexes all this information, is in a position to have a good insight into that. I would think that he has some information to back that up. This comment did not go widely commented on. Most journalists ignored it. It was overlooked by people, and I thought that was kind of an amazing statement. But after I thought about it a little bit, I realized most people don't have a way to understand what this means. And in fact, that's what Eric Schmidt said. Someone asked him later on, what do you mean by that? He said, most companies are not prepared for the incredible transformation they're about to go through. And really, that's why I put together this talk. I started to do a little bit of research. I found an article in The Economist. It was incredibly useful. And it showed this exponential increase in the amount of information we're producing, but our ability to store that information is only increasing in a linear fashion. So you can see in this chart that our ability to generate information is rapidly outstripping our ability to store it. And the folks in the storage industry, the companies that create the flash drives and hard drives and optical drives and so forth, they note this as well. They noted that last year, 2010, we generated 1.2 trillion bytes of information, gigabytes of information, or a zettabyte. If you don't know what a zettabyte is, that's a 1 followed by 21 zeros. That's the sheer amount of information that was generated last year. So we have this intense doubling and doubling and doubling exponential growth in the amount of information we're creating. Now, many people in the media industry think of convergence as the convergence of the television and the computer. And so when they look at a computer, they see a screen and they say, well, it's kind of like a TV set, so therefore we should deal with it the way we deal with television. I think they're missing something. That's not the convergence that's very important. The convergence that matters is the combination of the television and the telephone. No, I don't mean this old-fashioned phone. What I mean is telephony, the two-way network. This is what's driving this incredible increase in information. One expression of that, of course, we all have them in our pocket, are these incredible cell phones that can now play video. I introduced that technology to the world 10 years ago when I was part of the Packet Video team that launched mobile video. And today that's in more than 550 million devices around the world. But that's just one expression of it. In fact, computer processing power is now embedded in just about every device you can imagine. Here is a pair of shoes, running shoes from Adidas. They have microprocessors in them, so when you run, they can track your weight, they can track the rate that you're running at, the impact, and then the shoe, you can calibrate the shoe to precisely the type of impact and type of running conditions that you're experiencing. Credit cards now have microprocessors. Pens have microprocessors. Passports now have RFID chips inside of them. They've even started to develop microprocessors that can be inserted in the human body to track blood chemistry and other conditions. In fact, some scientists in research labs have developed technology that would implant a sensor on a human organ that would allow that organ to send messages. Yes, your heart can send a tweet to a cell phone. You can actually message a cell phone. Hard to believe, but that's happening now. We even generate information when we're asleep. This is a device that was introduced at CES earlier this year. It's from a company called Zeo. And you would put this electrode sensor on your head when you go to sleep at night. And when you're asleep, this device tracks your brainwave patterns. And it can be useful for people who want to train themselves using biofeedback to get deeper sleep or to work on lucid dreaming or whatever they might wish to do. So this is a device that tracks information we generate even when we're unconscious. And of course, it's not just consumers who are doing that. Other people want to know about your information as well. And so there's been an incredible increase since 2001 in the amount of surveillance, in the amount of mass surveillance that's occurring. Programs in the United States, for instance, like Total Information Awareness and Echelon, track many of the communications that we make. Over 1.4 billion email messages are intercepted every single day by the NSA in the United States. If you walk around the city of London, you'll probably notice that there are a lot of CCTV cameras. In fact, the UK is the most surveilled country on the planet, but there are many other countries that are closing in fast behind. 10 years ago, I worked with a team at Philips that had installed 30,000 CCTV cameras in the city of London. I thought that was a staggering number, 30,000 cameras. I was trying to imagine where they could be. If you figure there are probably 4 at each intersection, you start to do the math. You wonder, are there that many intersections in the city of London? Today, there are more than 500,000 CCTV cameras in London. And they estimate that there's one closed-circuit television camera, one camera for every 5 citizens in the United Kingdom. George Orwell, the British author who coined the term Big Brother is watching you, lived in Islington, and today, in a 1-block radius around his former residence, there are 32 CCTV cameras on 24-hour surveillance mode. So we're starting to be watched, and we generate information even when we're not consciously thinking about it. Just by walking through a city, you're being taped. They estimate that if you walk through the city of London in a normal business day, you'll be videotaped no fewer than 100 times. Not all of these cameras are networked, but that's rapidly happening. The data will be then analyzed robotically and scanned with algorithms, and it'll be able to be assessed. It isn't just people who are generating information. People generate information about each other as well. At this event and other events like it, it's very familiar now to see people using their iPads or tablets, their mobile phones, to comment, to blog, to post. And so we're creating information about other people's information as well, and that's another compounding effect. So that's another way to account for this increase in information. Facebook growth is something that we're all familiar with, over 600 million people. And you can see that's also kind of an exponential growth rate. What you might not be aware of is that Facebook is rapidly emerging as one of the largest media platforms in the world. It's certainly one of the largest media sharing platforms in the world. Every month, more than 3 billion photos are uploaded to Facebook. So last year, Facebook had more than 30 billion photos uploaded. It's by far the largest repository of photographs on the planet. And just to put that in contrast, every 3 months, Facebook gets more photos uploaded than Flickr has had in its entire existence. A couple of weeks ago, the CEO of Cisco made an interesting announcement. He announced that Cisco was going to abandon the Flip camera. And this is actually kind of an extraordinary thing, because Flip, in a very short period of time, made tremendous inroads into the video camera business. They were able to see something on the order of 30 or 35% market share from the major producers, the major manufacturers of video cameras, companies like Sony. And it was a tremendous assault on the video camera business. Flip cameras retail for about $150 in the US, so they really broke through. They made it possible for anyone who wanted to create a film or shoot video. They made it possible for them to do that. They dropped the price of entry from $1,000 to $100. It's really quite an extraordinary thing. But Cisco walked away from its investment. They had paid $500 million to acquire Flip. They walked away from it a few weeks ago because they saw the rise of cell phones with technology like packet video embedded in it around the world. There are now 2 billion devices that can record video on the planet. And not surprisingly, the amount of video we upload is also growing exponentially. Here's a chart from YouTube. Every minute of every day, more than 35 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube. That's extraordinary. Think about that for a second. If you're in the television business, this is what you're competing against. 35 hours, a day and a half of video is uploaded every single minute to YouTube. As users, as consumers, we rarely notice these technologies except when they break. We rarely think about the sheer scale, the incredible volume of information that's being uploaded. We're only aware of it when we run into the Twitter fail whale and we say, okay, the service is offline. That's because of the incredible amount of usage that's happening. Hundreds of millions of people using these services simultaneously. Some media companies have begun to focus on this, and they've begun to recalibrate what they do. Now, today, most media companies are migrating their products over to digital in some form or another. Some are having more success than others. New companies like Demand Media have sprung up that focus on an entirely new publishing model where they're producing content on demand, literally on demand, based on where the search volume happens. They go create custom content from a network of stringers. And it's not just startup companies like Demand Media. AOL recently announced that they're doing something similar, where they're going to develop tremendous amounts of content in response to search volume. It isn't just media companies. It isn't just the companies that produce content for a living. For example, major universities now are starting to routinely post all of their information, their course materials, the lectures, and so forth, on the web as well. And even those universities that don't have their information in digital form are finding new ways to scan it. So it isn't just about the content that's being currently produced. Universities and research organizations are going back in time, and they're starting to scan in. They're finding new ways to bring information online that previously was unavailable. And there are great examples of this every day, museums that are bringing their entire collections online. So you're starting to see whole industries, whole fields of knowledge, whole silos of information move to this digital sphere. Scientists increasingly are starting to look at different research problems as information problems. Here, for instance, is a rendition, an artist's rendition of the human genome. There are 3 billion base pairs in every human cell, 3 billion base pairs in the DNA in every single human cell. The study of human genomics and gradually human biology is becoming an information science. And gradually, scientists are beginning to become aware of how they might reprogram human biology at the cellular level. And so we're starting to see biology turn into an information science. The same is true with physics. At the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, they're able to now generate billions of collisions, actually hundreds of billions of collisions, every time they run the Large Hadron Collider. This generates an incredible amount of data, far more data than the researchers can actually record or analyze. So again, our ability to generate data is outstripping our ability to capture it, record it, store it, and manage it. Those present great growth opportunities, by the way, for businessmen in the future. The ability to manage information, the ability to retrieve it, store it, and make sense of it. We're starting to make our products also communicate with us. Our products are beginning to generate information as well. The RFID chip, radio frequency ID tags, are now so cheap to produce that they can be sold in these sort of peel-off, crackback stickers and applied to every single product in an inventory chain. So whether a product is in a factory in China or on a ship in the Pacific or in a warehouse in Arizona, it can be tracked by an inventory control mechanism. And so our products, the very boxes of things that we buy, whether it's a consumer electronics device or some perishable food that's on a shelf, is starting to be a source of information as well. And it's not just products, even livestock. These are cattle that have been implanted with RFID tags. And so these cattle generate information. Each cattle generates something on the order of 250 megabytes of data a year. I don't know what kind of information they're getting from a cow. My only point is that we're starting to see everything. We're starting to perceive everything around us as a source of information and find new ways to record it. For instance, our homes are now becoming the source of another kind of information for energy management. This is a smart meter. There are more than 71 million smart meters installed, and that number will increase. Within the next 3 years, there'll be more than 200 million smart homes. A smart home is a system that tracks energy use and all the systems of the home. So we're starting to look at a house as kind of a computing platform that generates information. And of course, these houses, in the future, they'll be connected to smart cities. There are more than 70 smart city projects around the world where the city management will be able to peer into the usage of all the city systems, all the municipal systems. And this is not just something that's happening in the United States or in Europe. This is happening around the world, these smart city programs. So our environment is becoming the source of data as well. Even our automobiles, there are more than 25 computers on most automobiles today. Today, that information isn't sent out through telemetry, but gradually the cars are also becoming wired in. And as driving conditions increase, the number of cars on each road increases and density increases, we're going to shift over to intelligent management systems, systems that track all the telemetry thrown off of a car and track it. So we'll start to have insight into all the different disparate cars. In fact, I believe that in our lifetime, we're going to look back at this time when individual people drove cars as kind of a peculiar moment in human history because these traffic management systems are coming online so fast. We're even beginning to monitor our environment. This is a photograph of a kind of sensor that's sent in the ocean, dropped in the ocean to manage information from the seas. And it tracks things like currents and ocean temperatures, fish, the migration patterns of ocean life. and even potential sources of energy. And of course, in our skies above us, we have thousands of satellites in geosynchronous orbit, pilotless drones, and blimps that measure everything from military action to weather patterns. You can even buy one of these drones yourself. This is a device that's sold for about $300. You can manage it with your iPhone, and you can actually strap a camera onto it. So if you want to have your own Predator drone fly around your neighborhood, that's available to you today. The point I'm making is that we're starting to wire up the whole planet for consciousness. This is an extraordinary breakthrough. We tend to take it for granted because it comes to us so gradually, but this represents a historic shift in human capability, our ability to understand how we connect with the rest of the planet, and our ability to see what's happening on the opposite side of the globe. In fact, what we're doing is extending our senses through this network to other people who are gathering images, gathering video, recording their thoughts in blogs and posts and so forth, and so we're beginning to use this network to extend our sensory capability to connect with people and see through their eyes in other parts of the world. This is set to grow rapidly. You know, the point of exponential growth is that it grows so rapidly that it's almost hard when you get in the knee of the curve to understand the incredible increase. In 2009, we generated just less than 1 zettabyte. In 2010, we generated just a bit over 1 zettabyte. Scientists predict that will generate more than 35 zettabytes of information by 2020. So you can see this as a tremendous growth area. Why does it matter? Why is this important? Why am I taking your time this morning to talk about the growth of information production? It's my thesis that the process of improving human life is gated by our ability to share information. I'll make 3 simple statements. The first one is that information drives the advance of civilization. The ability of people to communicate with each other, new ways of living, new ways of producing, new ways of storing, the ability to share that information, pass it on, helps civilization improve. And of course, media technology is what enables us to do that. So if we have improved media technology, we're able to communicate even more, better information that advances civilization. So therefore, media technology shapes human civilization. I know it's a crazy claim, but let's look back at 3 historical moments in the past. First, the major transition, probably the most important transition in human anthropology, is when humans developed the capacity to communicate their ideas through spoken word, through speech. That's really what separates man from other animals. And no one knows exactly when this occurred. It's estimated to have happened sometime around 150,000 years ago. And as a result of speech communication, humans were able to coordinate their activities for their defense, to find nutrition, to organize village life, and so forth. And they were able to teach each other things. And they were able to pass the information along to the next generation. But human lifespans were very short, and there's only so much information you can pass along through speech before one passes away. When humans only live 25 years or so, there's only so much information, and as a result, there wasn't that much progress in human civilization at that time. It was really only until we developed the capacity to store our thoughts in writing that we saw a major increase and a transformation of what human civilization represented. Simultaneously, around 5,000 years ago, in 4 parts of the world, in China, in the Indus River region, in what's known as Mesopotamia, and in the Luxor region of Egypt, 4 civilizations emerged, and they all emerged using some form of written communication to store and record their thoughts. And here I'm showing you the ancient city of Sumer. And this is a tremendous change from tribal civilization because using written, the ability to record on clay tablets, they were able to track the stars and able to start to do mathematics. And so that enabled them to start to track weather patterns and planting cycles. And so they were able to then start to increase the amount of agriculture. And the agricultural surplus that they had made it possible for an economy to emerge. And again, that required the recording of numbers. Very sophisticated mathematics or quadratic equations were done on clay tablets in the Sumerian times. And so the first economy started to arrive out of that surplus. And of course, once an economy emerged, we needed laws to govern it. And in fact, the Hammurabi Code it comes from this time, and that's really the first set of laws that we're aware of. And all of this started about 5,000 years ago with the ability to record speech. So a tremendous shift in human civilization. And today, we can still see some of the great buildings that were built as a result of that surplus, the agricultural surplus that freed so many workers and made it possible for them to work. So these are really the first big steps in human civilization. But the next shift is one that we actually can experience today, and that's the introduction of movable type in the 1450s. This is a tremendous change. It really reshaped the world, and it reshaped the way we think. The introduction of movable type is really the mechanized reproduction of thought and the ability to distribute that thought to many, many more people. Just 30 years after the death of Gutenberg, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittgenstein and challenged the church's stranglehold, the monopoly that the church had on information in Europe at the time. And that started a revolution of thinking. A revolution of thinking that caused people to begin to understand that multiple points of view were something that was acceptable. That dialogue took place in print. Some people aren't aware that Martin Luther did something very smart. Before he nailed his 95 Theses to the church, he was quite aware that the church had a habit of burning heretics at the stake, and he didn't want to have that outcome happen to him. So he distributed multiple copies of his 95 Theses to like-minded ministers around Germany. He did this with print. So he used the new technology of print to distribute what we would call today a backup copy of his 95 Theses. And when the church asked him about this, he professed that he didn't know. The Reformation was the beginning of a process of shifting human thought patterns that had been encoded for centuries. 100 years after Martin Luther, René Descartes perfected the scientific method in his discourse on method, and books were essential to the scientific method as well, because they enabled two different researchers in different parts of the world to use the exact same set of information to conduct the exact same experiment and verify it. And that principle has resulted in the greatest increase in human knowledge in history. The scientific principle was really the beginning of modern-day mathematics, chemistry, biology, and physics. And just 100 years after that, philosophers like John Locke began to posit theories about the rights of man and call into question some age-old wisdom that really was a hangover from the tribal era about divine rights of kings. And he wrote treatises that were printed and they're circulated that challenged this concept and posited the notion of the rights of man. And those ideas were encoded in the Constitution of the United States. So a printed document, for the first time ever, a printed document was circulated by a group of people who said, this is what our nation represents. And that's a historical moment. All of these progresses, all of these advances were the result of printing technology. It's no coincidence that several of the founders of the United States were printers or publishers. They understood the importance of printing technology, and they enshrined it in the US Constitution. They enshrined it in two ways: the principle of the free press and the principle of the postal service that would distribute the free press and actually subsidize the distribution of the free press. So the founders of the United States understood information technology as a good thing that would advance business and advance education and learning. We live with so many artifacts of the printing technology today that, in a way, we're unconscious of our environment. We can't actually see these around us. And what I wanted to do is spend the rest of my time speculating a little bit about what might change. I mentioned in the beginning, Amazon announced that the book era is coming to an end, this idea of printed books. It's not over. Books will be with us for a very, very long time. But I suspect you're going to see a tremendous change in the print industry in the next 5 years as most of the revenue shifts, just as it did in the music business, over to digital. And when that occurs, there's going to be a shift away from some of the age-old practices that we've lived with, that have shaped our understanding and have shaped our civilization. And so if you want to predict the future of this two-way network and the impact of this information surge, it might be useful to start with some of the legacy artifacts of the print era. So to predict the vectors of change, I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. First one that's going to change with this information age and the two-way network is your role. In a print-dominated world or a broadcast-dominated world, your role is a passive observer. Your job is to sit there and watch while someone else tells you a story. But in the two-way network, you're an active participant. Now, normally in a speech like this is where I would talk about online gaming or social gaming or something. Today, I'm going to talk about something rather different. I'm going to talk about the news and politics. Gutenberg didn't just invent the way to print the book. His printing press was rapidly adopted for the dissemination of news. In different countries, it played out differently. But within 100 years after the printing press was introduced, already in courtly circles, pamphlets were produced privately that would be circulated, that could be used to persuade the prince or the king one way or the other by some faction of his courtiers. And so this evolved into the newspaper and the pamphleteer business, and newspapers emerged by the 1700s as a tremendously powerful surge, an incredible influence in the shaping of politics. What's interesting about this is previously in history, at no time previously in history did any government think it was necessary to inform the public about anything. You know, if you think about the times of kings and empires and so forth, the church, they didn't really feel obligated to share any information with people, but the invention of the printing press and the rapid adoption of the printed word created a demand for information, and so politics changed. And so as a result of the news and the newspapers, gradually different political parties began to use print here in the form of posters, but also in the form of pamphlets and newspaper articles to persuade and cajole people from one point of view to another. And we're familiar with this today because every newspaper that you read comes with a certain editorial perspective that tries to persuade you. And all of our broadcast media follow in the same paradigm. And so media can be viewed as a means of persuasion. But what's happening now in this two-way network is a radical departure from this, a radical change. Over the last 3 years, we've seen social media used for huge political change, beginning in 2009 with an uprising in Tehran, where a presidential election was called into question and people poured out in the streets, the so-called Green Revolution that occurred. And they used Twitter and they used Facebook and other social media to communicate and organize. What's interesting about this is these points of view weren't published in a newspaper. No one was attempting to use media to persuade. In fact, the Iranian government shut down all the channels of communication. They shut down all the broadcast media, but it was to no avail. And what you saw is a historically unprecedented phenomenon where people organized themselves. They used social media to create these autonomous groups that emerged instantaneously and organized themselves. And we've seen this happen again and again. Here in Korea, back one. Here in Korea, we're at the WTF forum, but also, of course, most recently in the Middle East and the Maghreb region, where social media tools enable people to communicate and these autonomous networks of activists to emerge. And what's most striking is that these leaderless groups emerge overnight. They emerge in a matter of days, and people congregate, huge numbers of people congregate. That's historically unprecedented, and it's an entirely new way that new media is shaping politics, and this is here to stay. Another major trend is value. In the media industry, we're constantly struggling to try to define where's the value in online media? Now, it's been an adage for many, many years. People in the music industry, for instance, have told us, well, you've got to stop thinking about your business as selling products on a fixed disc and start thinking about selling your business as a service, right? And so we've seen that happen now. We're starting to shift. The book is really the first content product. The idea of taking a bunch of information that previously hadn't been assembled, compiling it together, putting it inside of a nice cover, that's really the first media product. In fact, it's the first packaged good in history, a product inside of a package. So the book is really kind of amazing in terms of consumer product. It was really the first precedent. And that kind of thinking, that legacy thinking, has been with us all the way all the way to the present moment. The way we sell DVDs is not really so different from the way we sell books. But in the last few years, we've started to see a shift towards a kind of a post-product in economy, where we're now selling content as a service. And these are some of the examples. Netflix, probably the most exciting example on the list here, where they're now providing unlimited access to video on demand streaming, and it's incredibly popular in the United States. Netflix now accounts for 30% of the bandwidth consumed in the United States. And so this is a portent of the future. But what I'm starting to see as I work with companies and CEOs all over the world is that we're now moving to something beyond services, where we start to understand audiences as data. And so the content is a way to gather an audience, and then there's a new way to mine the audience as data. I was interested a couple of years ago to see some scientists did research with Twitter. And they had a theory. They were doing sentiment analysis. They can analyze words. Some words are neutral. Some words have a positive connotation. Some words have a negative connotation. And they studied a correlation with Twitter. And they took all the words in Twitter and said, if the sentiment, the general sentiment is positive or negative, is there any correlation with Wall Street and the stock market? And indeed there was, 84% correlation. This is one of the first kinds of sentiment analysis that really captured popular imagination, the idea of mining all that social media data to find out if there's actually a real-world impact. One of the companies that I work with is called Visual DNA, and they provide this as a service to media companies, helping media companies understand their audience and their audience behavior. Now, behavior analytics is a booming field. In display advertising, this is probably the hottest space in online advertising right now. The idea of taking your audience's behavior and information, their usage pattern, and turning that into an asset that can be sold. Here's another example. This is an online virtual world. The game is called Entropia, and this thing that we're looking at is a virtual nightclub called Club Never Die. Now, this doesn't exist in the real world. This is a club that is the product of one of the members of this game, one of the players of the game. He created it. In fact, he bought it for 100,000 pounds. He mortgaged his home, and he sold it last year for $600,000. So he had a fourfold return on his investment. He took a virtual property and developed it into a booming virtual nightclub. Now note that he doesn't own the nightclub. The bits exist on a server that's part of a service that he's a subscriber to, but he was able to sell this virtual good. In the United States this year, in 2011, we're going to sell more than $2 billion worth of virtual goods. And worldwide, that number is something on the order of $5 billion. I realize in a multi-trillion-dollar economy, that's not a significant number, but it's an interesting directional trend that shows that you can take audience data, audience information, the data generated by members or players in a service, and start to turn that into a proprietary data asset that can be sold. Final thought here for you. Metadata, the migration from the invisible metadata, layers of data that surround us, to the tangible. And this is perhaps the most interesting of them all. Back to Gutenberg. Gutenberg didn't just invent books or just make it possible for the movable type to create books. They also created one of the most popular things that in the early days of print were atlases and maps. People were fascinated by this because previously they had no global concept. They had a very parochial concept of where they lived. And really just one or two villages away was viewed as a very strange place. And there was a great fear of strangers. And so people were fascinated by maps. Maps proved to be one of the most popular things in the early days of print. But maps did an interesting thing to us. Maps bifurcated us in a way. They bifurcated our understanding of the world because there's the real world that we deal with, and that's the things around you and the people that you know and the places that you can walk to or drive to. So we have that understanding of the real world. But then we also have this kind of global consciousness, this map consciousness. It's in the back of our head, and that's a different thing. It's a rather abstract, theoretical thing, and really that's our experience today if you think about it. What's happening now with digital media and the two-way network and the power of these incredible microprocessors in our mobile phones is that we're now starting to fuse the digital network and the metadata that's invisible with the visible world around us. I'm referring to alternate reality and things like layer that give you a way to kind of perceive that data, that world of data around you. And this is quite interesting. It's bringing those two halves together, the metadata, the abstract information, together with the real world that you can see around you. And here's some examples of how that's going to be a business. This is an artist rendition of a heads-up display that you may see in an automobile in the future. And heads-up display will show you data of interest around in the world that's around you as you're driving through a town, places to park, things that you might want to buy, information about traffic circumstances and so forth. Some people look at this and they say, oh my goodness, that's going to be overload, sensory overload. Well, scientists are also working on eye tracking technology that can tell where your eyes are looking and use the eyes as input so that they can tailor these heads-up displays and give you only the information that's relevant to the place that you're looking at. It isn't just people that are going to use this information. Automatic or robotic cars are a real phenomenon today. This is a research experiment I'm showing you here from the Freie Universität in Berlin. They've developed a cab that can be driven, that can be summoned by your iPad, and then when you get in the cab, there's no driver. You use your iPad to tell it where to go, and it will drive. And as you can see, it uses telemetry and all the data, all those data fields, but it uses it to drive. Now, I know in this picture you can see two people in the car, but that's just the photo that I happen to have. By the way, I don't know if you noticed the news recently, but Google has had a fleet of robot cars in the United States, and these cars have been driving, they've driven more than 140,000 miles on US roads in the past year, and just last month, Google asked the state of Nevada to legalize robot cars. We're going to see robot cars come much sooner than people expect. I had the opportunity last fall to work with Pranav Mistry. Pranav is a researcher at MIT's Fluid Interfaces group, and he's trying to work on something that I think is so extraordinary. It's called Sixth Sense, and what he's seeking to do is to erase that last piece of interface that's between us and the data world, and that's the computer. You know, whether it's your tablet or your cell phone or your laptop or whatever, he'd like to eliminate it, and he's developed this system, which you can see today, it's very rudimentary because he's used off-the-shelf hardware. But what's cool is that he's going to open source this technology so anyone can develop it. It's a kind of pendant that hangs around your neck, and it has a microprocessor. It also has a camera and a projector. And the camera can see, and the projector can display, so you don't need a laptop computer. The input is your fingers. You can see on his fingertips. He can take a photo just by going like this, and he frames the shot that he wants. The sensor can pick it up, and it takes the picture that he's looking for. No camera necessary. When he wants to dial a telephone, this is how he does it. The projector displays the keypad on his hand, and he simply dials on his hand, and it tracks the gestures, and it dials the telephone number for him. And so he's in the process of erasing that last interface. And really the goal of that group is to start to turn every surface in the world into a computing surface. The implications of this go so far, they go way beyond the media business. Every industry is turning into an information business. And don't forget, the invention of the printing press wasn't just the first media product, it was also the first mass-produced product. It was the first mechanically reproduced product. And so it was really the invention of the assembly line. Here, the Henry Ford automobile assembly line, which really has stayed with us, has been a core part of the manufacturing process. But increasingly, those factories are turning into robotic factories. And these robotic factories mean that the value in that production process is migrating from the plant to the information that governs that process. And so even industrial manufacturing is turning into a kind of information process. And as a result, we're able to start making custom products. Because as we move more towards information-driven manufacturing, we're going to move towards customized manufacturing. Instead of a mass economy, we're going to start to have a customized or personalized economy. And ultimately, individual people will probably be able to have that capability of manufacturing right on their desktop. The advent of 3D printers, I think, is one of the most profound new breakthroughs, this maker community. If you're not familiar with these things, they allow you to manufacture 3D objects. And today they're very small, but in the future they'll get bigger and bigger. It's very much like the homebrew computer movement in the 1970s that led to the personal computer revolution in the 1980s. These are 3D printers that you can now buy at home. And the technology is totally open source. In fact, the people behind the 3D printing movement are fanatically open source. And so they want to open source mass manufacturing and allow people to manufacture in their own homes. And in case some people think that that's only limited to small things, a group of researchers recently built an entire automobile chassis using the 3D printers. And so you're going to start to see industry change very quickly because we'll be able to do rapid prototyping and rapid building, customization, and so forth. So in summary, let me offer you these thoughts. The two-way network represents a massive shift in our ability to create information. In fact, it's accelerating the production of information. And as a result of that, it's liberating information that was trapped previously in physical products, whether it's a CD or, frankly, an automobile or a building. The two-way network is also starting to fuse those two bifurcated parts, that digital domain that was so abstract to us, that information world, and the real world around us. We're starting to bring those two things together with our mobile devices. And it allows us to extend our human sensory apparatus to the human sensory apparatus of billions of people around the planet. And so we're able to see through their eyes and experience through them what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. And that's going to lead to a huge increase in empathy and understanding and awareness, I believe, in the next century. And that means that we're going to extend human consciousness to a planetary scale. That is a global change, and that's a tremendously exciting change. I thank you very much for your time and attention today. I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope you found this useful. Do we have time for questions from the floor? If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take one or two. No questions. All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy the show.
For